Okay, so we have heard a lot of interesting themes today, right? We've talked about few-shot learning, we talked about connections of AI to cognitive science, then to neuroscience. We just heard about representations. So I'm going to try to tie all of those themes together in my talk and connect them to communication between humans and machines. And so my focus is going to be on what we call representational alignment. So Rory today talked about 18th century chemists. I want to take you 2 centuries further back to the alchemists of the 16th century. So over there on the, I guess from your perspective, the left side, you see the alchemical table of elements from Basil Valentine, a 15th, 16th century alchemist. And on the right, you see a modern periodic table of elements. Now, if an alchemist were to meet a modern-day chemist and they were to observe the outcome of a reaction together, Basil would have a lot of trouble learning from the chemist or from the physicist. And we argue that the reason that Basil is going to have trouble is because he lacks representational alignment. He lacks the representations of how the world actually works, at least according to the chemist. Right, so making a little cartoon of that, we say that the chemist and the alchemist have different representations of the world. And this hinders their ability to communicate with each other. Meanwhile, if we were to take 2 modern-day chemists, we're not saying that they see the world exactly identically. There's of course going to be individual difference, but their representations are going to be much more aligned, and that'll make it a lot easier for them to communicate with each other, to collaborate, to learn from each other. So I want to sort of give you a tool you can take away with you today. And so I'm going to go through a very quick demonstration of how you can immediately start studying representational alignment in your research. And then I'll talk about results we've had, why that's interesting, why I think you should do it. OK, so I'm going to give you a 3-step formula for studying representational alignment. And the first step is we actually need a way to figure out what are our agents' representations. Right? So in machine learning, maybe that's a little bit easier to do. Maybe you can just look at the hidden weights, the activations. For humans, that's a lot more difficult. Right? Maybe the neuroscientists in this room will disagree with me and say we have great, wonderful ways to do neuroimaging and we can just read the representations right off the brain. But certainly for the last 80 years, this was a difficult thing to do. So let's say, for example, we wanted to know how people represent colors. It turns out that cognitive scientists have had a tool for doing that for the past 80 years. And that tool is similarity judgments. So what I can do if I want to know how you represent colors is I can ask you, how similar are these 2 colors? And I can keep asking you that over and over and over and over again for a large set of colors and building up this similarity matrix, right? How do you perceive, what is the perceptual similarity for different colors? I can then apply some kind of embedding method, low-dimensional embedding method, like multidimensional scaling, to try and find low-dimensional vectors that respect these similarity judgments, that say that the colors you think are similar should be close together, the ones you think are different should be far apart. And it turns out when we apply that to this color data, we get something very familiar out, something that looks like the color wheel. Right? So I think that's not a surprise for a lot of people in the room. But for some, it might be, right? The color wheel isn't just some generic artifact we came up with. It is actually how people represent colors. Great. So we now have a way to infer the shape of hidden representations by using similarity judgments. What we need next is a metric for evaluating representational alignment between 2 different agents. Now, this is a pretty easy step. What we suggest is that you take a pool of shared data of some stimuli, say a number of images, and you show it to both agents. And you repeat what we just did, right? You look at the shape of their hidden representations. You ask them to give you those similarity judgments. Maybe for the machine learning model for your neural network, you're just looking at the cosine similarity between the activation vectors. Either way, what you're doing is you're building up a similarity matrix for both of your agents. And what you're doing at the end is computing some kind of distance metric between those two similarity matrices. So oftentimes, a lot of people will recognize this. You typically use something like Pearson correlation, Spearman correlation, but there's a whole range of different metrics you can use. Great. We have the hidden representations, we have a metric now, and now we want to start measuring alignment. And what we advocate for is measuring alignment across diverse domains. Our argument is that representational alignment is not a homogeneous property. Just because you and I perceive colors the same way doesn't mean we're going to perceive emotions or sounds or anything else the same way. So when measuring a representational alignment, we need to make sure to do it across a wide range of domains. So let's step through an example now. Say I want to know how representationally aligned I am with one of the recent LLMs in terms of color perception or color representation. Obviously, GPT-3 was an older model. It couldn't see yet. We couldn't show it color. So we can encode the colors as hex codes and ask it for similarity judgments. This method is great, by the way, because you can apply it to closed source models, which we increasingly have more of, where you don't have access to those internal representations, but you need a way to probe at those internal representations. And it turns out if you ask GPT-3 to give you a bunch of similarity judgments, you get something familiar. Right, this is the psychological space, the inferred psychological space of how GPT-3 perceives colors. And it looks somewhat familiar. It looks somewhat similar to what humans are doing. But let's quantify that. Right, so we repeat the same experiment with humans. We ask them to rate the similarity between the same set of colors. And we can repeat that type of experiment across different modalities, right? So in this particular paper, we did it for 6 psychophysical domains, various sound domains, color, taste, timbre, etc. And what you find is exactly what we were saying, that representational alignment is not a homogeneous property, right? What this graph here is telling you is that you might be willing to trust GPT with how to color coordinate your outfit, but perhaps you shouldn't trust GPT when you're asking it to design a recipe for you. OK. There's lots of ways you can scale this up, right? The same approach you can apply to all sorts of different types of data. The typical types of data sets you see in machine learning, whether it's video, images, audio, you can work directly with those data sets, or you can get people or models to convert those data sets first into text and repeat those experiments of the large language models that we did. So you have lots of different pipelines available to you when you're trying to measure representational alignment across these diverse domains for many different models. Great. So we have this very simple 3-step formula now, right, for studying representational alignment. We find a way to infer the shape of the hidden representations, we pick our metric, and we just start measuring away. It turns out that basically this exact method is used across machine learning, neuroscience, and cognitive science under various different names. Whether you're thinking about triplet similarity or contrastive learning, whether in neuroscience you're considering representational similarity analysis, or in cognitive science, the method I showed you, researchers from all 3 fields are using the same method. And we found that researchers from all the 3 fields are also studying this method in different settings, right? So some researchers are just using this method to measure representational alignment between different agents, but other researchers are trying to bridge these diverse representational spaces, essentially translate between the different agents, while other researchers are aiming to increase representational alignment, right? So how do I train a model that is going to have more human-like representations? The one problem that we found is that there isn't a lot of knowledge sharing between these fields, these niches that study representational alignment. And so a lot of my recent work has been on trying to encourage the sort of members, the research communities of these 3 fields who are interested in representational alignment to talk to each other, to adopt standardized language, to work with similar frameworks, and share knowledge with each other. OK, but why am I doing that? Why do I want this unified field of representational alignment? My argument is that alignment governs the communication dynamics between intelligent systems. And when I say systems, I say that word very, very broadly, right? So we can be talking about humans, animals, models, brains, robots, communities, layers of a network, different modalities, right? Language versus vision. In all of these cases, we can be studying representations formed in those systems and the alignment between them. And we find that the degree of representational alignment ends up having important implications in various settings like communication, cooperation, and competition between these various systems. Importantly, it also lets us predict how these systems are going to work. So for example, if we have a simple model, a simple explainable model that is highly representationally aligned with a neural network or with a human, it helps us understand that complex system via the simple one. Now, we're at the AI session today, so in particular, I'm going to focus on alignment of models with humans and the important downstream effects we see there. And so we have a number of results now from us and other researchers that link representational alignment of our models with humans, so how human-like the representations our machines have, to important downstream effects: improved generalization, sample efficiency, robustness, etc. So for me, what that immediately makes me think of when I see these values, these sort of downstream effects, are the aspects of my research that I'm very focused on, right? Which is learning from small data. So I want to talk very quickly about the connections with representational alignment to machine learning from human teachers. And if we have time, I'll talk a tiny bit about human learning from machine teachers. OK, so in this study I want to highlight, we're going to focus on how representational alignment between humans and machines impacts in particular generalization, sample efficiency, and robustness. So let's consider this setup where we have a teacher and a student. And the teacher and the student have their own representations that were formed before, but the teacher now needs to teach the student about this new object, right? They see this image. But what we're going to do is we're going to constrain the communication between the teacher and the student into what we call these triplet statements. So we're going to say that the teacher can only make statements of the form x is closer to y than to z, right? The new object, whatever it is closer in my representational space as the teacher to the wolf than to the lemur. But the student is going to be interpreting that query in their own representational space, right? So the student says, oh, OK, the object is closer to wolf than to lemur, so it can't be in this red space. It must be in the yellow side. The teacher and the student can keep repeating this process over and over and over again, and eventually the student is going to converge to some small area where the object can be located. Now, what we can tell is that the dynamics of this process, how well the student is going to converge to that small area, how quickly they're going to converge to that, is going to depend on the degree of representational alignment between the teacher and the student. We can make a very nice connection to information theory to quantify that. And this is sort of the one piece of math I'm going to show you, and I'm going to keep it very light. Right? Let's just turn this notion of representational alignment into a probabilistic framing. Right? We say that 1 minus p is the probability that the teacher and the student agree about the statement x is closer to y than to z. If that's the case, then it turns out that the communication from the teacher to the student can be formulated as what we call a binary symmetric channel. So in a binary symmetric channel, a teacher or an encoder is sending a bit at a time over to a student. And with some probability p, that bit is going to flip by the time it reaches the student. Now, what information theory tells us is that the capacity of this channel has a U-shaped relationship with alignment, or a U-shaped relationship with this value p. Right? Because if a teacher is sending you the correct bit, if it's never being flipped, all you have to do is listen to the teacher. But if the teacher is always lying to you, every single bit the teacher sends you gets flipped, then all you have to do is flip that bit back. And so that gives us this nice U-shape. But the worst case scenario, if the teacher is sometimes lying to you, sometimes not lying to you, and you have no idea which bits should you be flipping. So what that tells us is that representational alignment with our models should lead to this U-shaped curves when it comes to our models learning from our labels. Now, I described this weird triplet scenario, right? The teacher was communicating in this strange communication game. What does that have to do with typical learning, how machines typically learn? It turns out that we can show the typical way machines learn, right? Supervised learning, we present these labels, hard labels or soft labels. This image is a tiger, this image is a zebra. It turns out that those can be decomposed into packets of those triplet statements, right? When I tell you that this image is a tiger but not a zebra, I'm telling you the image is closer to the tiger concept, than it is to the zebra concept. So it turns out that the strange communication game that we had set up actually reflects what happens in real supervised learning. And almost any supervision signal, hard labels, soft labels, triplets, etc., can be decomposed into statements of this kind. So the prediction is, the theoretical prediction is, that we should see this type of U-shaped curve when we're doing few-shot learning with our models. Right? So if we were to take on the x-axis and have the representational alignment between a model and a human, we should see a U-shaped curve emerge in terms of the model's performance on few-shot learning. And when we look at over 500 ImageNet models and perform transfer learning, we see that indeed this type of U-shaped curve starts to emerge. So in practice, what this means is that you want your models to either have very human-like representations or very non-human-like representations. What you don't want to do is only partially optimize for this notion of human-like representations. And so we find that there's a similar connection to properties like generalization, properties like robustness, but I won't spend too much time on this. In general, what this tells us is that we can leverage representational alignment as a way to impact these downstream properties we care about. So we have lots of additional exciting work with this, where we show that models can learn human preferences, models can learn human values, models can even learn from human uncertainty, and it all depends on this notion of representational alignment. But very briefly, in sort of the 30-second sprint, I want to tell you about the connection to human learning from machine teachers. And this is sort of like breaking results that we submitted to NeurIPS at 3:59 p.m. at the time of the deadline 3 days ago, so you are the first to hear about it. Basically, the question we had was, why sometimes are experts not great teachers? Right? We've been very lucky that the talks today have been phenomenal and fantastic and accessible, but we've all had teachers, professors, educators who are absolutely brilliant at their research, the absolute top experts. But when they try to explain it to you, when they try to teach it to you, you fail to understand them. It doesn't work at all. Why does that happen? And so our argument is that in many cases, there is a trade-off between representational alignment and expertise. Sometimes you're better off learning from a peer who maybe only knows the subject a little bit better than you. They only studied 2 more lectures than you did, but they know how you think, and they can explain things in your words or in your representations. And so we have a simulation here where we have machines teaching machines in supervised learning settings, and we find that there's this nice curve that happens. Right on the bottom, on the x-axis, we have the error rate of the teacher. On the y-axis, we have student accuracy. And you can see that as teacher error rate increases, performance drops, but it's modulated by representational alignment. So you can recover a lot of performance by having a teacher who's more aligned with the student, even if they're noisy, even if they don't know the subject that well. And it turns out when we rerun this experiment with humans, when we have machines teaching humans, the same thing happens in practice. We see this same type of curve forming. And I won't go into the details of this experiment, but I will say that the implications of this are very interesting. It tells us that having monolithic models, models that are just the best at every domain, isn't necessarily the best way to go. We want to have models that are going to be able to adapt to people. We potentially want different types of models for different types of peoples, coming from different cultures, different languages, different backgrounds. Right? So this tells us that if we want machines to teach humans, to augment humans instead of just replacing them, we need to make sure that they have human-like representations. All right, so to summarize what we've said today, is that we can study representational alignment by extracting hidden representations and measuring alignment in all sorts of domains. And the reason we want to do that is because representational alignment is a precursor to many of the things we care about in human-AI interaction. So we have some work that sort of summarizes an overview of this entire field. Check it out for more details. But more importantly, if you want to chat, please reach out. We're very happy to help you study representational alignment in your own research. Thank you so much, and thank you to my collaborators.